Great. Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Emily Seraphy Cox. I am a foundation officer here at the Peace Development Fund. And today's info session is about fiscal sponsorship with PDF. The Peace Development Fund, let's see, how do I get to the next slide? There it is. Today's agenda is we're going to talk a little bit about the history and values of the Peace Development Fund. Then I'll talk a little bit about what is fiscal sponsorship, why somebody might be interested in fiscal sponsorship. I'll do an overview of our program here at the Peace Development Fund, the different roles and responsibilities between us as the fiscal sponsor and the organizations that we support through our fiscal sponsorship. I'll talk a bit about the application process and then kind of wrap it up at the end. So the Peace Development Fund was founded in 1981 as a public foundation. So that means that we actually raise money from the public and provide programs, both in the form of grants and fiscal sponsorship, as well as technical assistance and capacity building programs to organizations working for social justice throughout the country and also at times around the world. So when we were founded, the organization was founded, as the name implies, as a way to fund the peace movement. At the time, it was on the heels of the Vietnam War, and that meant very much anti-war organizing, anti-militarism, a lot of anti-nuclear organizing in the early days. And over the course of the first few decades of the organization's life, it went through some transformations. And one of the transformations was thinking about peace, not just as the absence of war, but as the presence of justice. And that transformation was right there from the start as well, in terms of the seeds of that transformation were because of the relationships that Peace Development Fund had with the organizations that it supported. And many of those organizations were grassroots. You know, we've had a focus on grassroots organizations from the start. Not exclusively, but definitely a focus in that direction. And so now we talk about investing in the seedlings of the movement. So oftentimes the grants that we give are to very small organizations. The fiscal sponsorships that we provide are often to new organizations. Doesn't have to be a small organization for a fiscal sponsorship either. We'll talk about that later. But fiscal sponsorship is often something that attracts new ideas and new small emerging organizations. So our mission is that we work to build the capacity of community-based organizations through grants, trainings, and other resources as partners in human rights and social justice movements. Another transformation that the organization went through in some of those early days was actually with its board of directors. When it was founded, our board of directors was made up entirely of white folks, and actually through an intentional process, our board of directors now, for the past several decades, has been majority people of color and activists and organizers on the ground. So the values of the Peace Development Fund are that investing in the seedlings of the movement and being a part of that movement ourselves. This video, I hope it's going to work, is a video about the Peace Development Fund that we commissioned to celebrate our 40th anniversary, which we just celebrated last year. So I am hoping that this is going to work.
If someone is screaming in my face, and I punch them and knock them unconscious, they're not screaming at me anymore. Did I just create peace by punching this person in the face? As absurd as that example is, this is how our society tries to create peace. Mass incarceration, if we just lock up all the criminals, then we'll have peace. If all the Black Lives Matter protesters would just shut up, then we'll have peace. But in reality, in a world where violence has become so normalized, peace is a messy process because it requires justice, and justice is loud.
So the Peace Development Fund started as a consequence of the nuclear weapons freeze campaign. We called it the Nuclear Weapons Moratorium. And we were all focused at that time in the early days on issues of peace and disarmament, particularly nuclear disarmament. And at the same time, we realized there was almost no funding available for grassroots groups. And it was only grassroots groups that were going to bring about change in people's attitude. So a few of us decided that we would start a fund that would fund exclusively grassroots work.
All 5 programs are the Sustainability Project, the Community Organizing Grants Docket, the Donor Advised Funds, Fiscal Sponsorship Program, and the Special Initiatives. We understand and believe that folks in the community know what they need. So our job is to get them resources. We have folks in our systems by design who are part of those movements. That gives it strength and capacity and credibility and respect and trust. So when we're sitting down across the table from somebody in the community who's just meeting us for the first time, we're not bringing BS, we're bringing real experience. And that's that authentic relationship on which we base our grant making. Our job is to get resources and try to get it to you. And your job is to do what you need to do in your community. It's not us to tell you that.
BASE was the Building Action for Sustainable Environments. And it brought together 15, 16 communities that were all living near some chain of the nuclear cycle. For the first time that I've ever known, bringing all of the pieces of that chain together, all of the links of that chain together, so we can see the entire arc of the nuclear industry. And this isn't just unique to BASE. There's such a need for grassroots organizations to come and meet each other and to do collective visioning and collective strategizing, but that no one has the time to organize these big types of gatherings. In a lot of the initiatives that we put on, PDF took on that role, where we would pull together groups of 40, 50 different activist organizations and give them 3 or 4 days. And again, it wasn't like an agenda that we planned. We kind of handed it over to them and saying, we'll fund this gathering, we'll do all of the logistics, we'll buy all the plane tickets, and you all figure out what you need to talk about.
All these people were coming together and bringing a bunch of organizers into a room that were willing and committed to figuring out how are we able to support each other? How are we able to address our cultural differences? Having people on the board was a very important issue. To have the representation that we needed to understand what was happening in the indigenous world and the issues that we needed to address from a grassroots perspective, to ensure that we were being able to fund the communities at the level that we were.
And it was oftentimes a messy process, right? Because it is such a new thing. It wasn't always perfect. It wasn't always clean. We had arguments. But I think the fact that we had arguments with our grantees says a lot, right? Like, how many foundations have the type of relationships where they can have real conflict with their grantees and get through it and never question that the funding would be cut because we were having this conflict? There was already the relationship and the trust that allowed us to go to that depth, that allowed the grantees to trust that, oh, PDF is really serious when they say that we're gonna try this thing called co-creation. We're gonna try to actually co-create this initiative with the grantees, with PDF just being one of the people that had a seat at the table.
And how could we build a movement that would allow us to see the movement as a whole rather than individual movements going on in individual communities? How do we build a movement that is sustainable? What is it going to look like when you have your son? What are the next 7 generations going to look like?
The big broad base of small donors is the bread and butter of this whole
I'm actually going to pause it there. There is a couple more minutes of this video, but that gives you kind of a little overview of the Peace Development Fund and our work. And that video is on our website if you want to see it again or watch the rest of it. So what is fiscal sponsorship? Fiscal sponsorship at its base is a way to both start new nonprofit efforts and seed social movements, but it could also be existing efforts and things that are continuing. There are many different ways to enter into a fiscal sponsorship relationship as the fiscally sponsored organization. So we as the 501c3 charitable organization, so that's a designation with the IRS, we are registered that way and have been for 40 plus years. We as the charitable organization provide administrative services and oversight to a new idea or project. So the relationship is one of both stewardship of the funds, as well as assistance and support of some of the backbone administrative work. So the two most common models of fiscal sponsorship, there are actually quite a few different models of fiscal sponsorship. The two most common that you'll hear about are Model A and Model C. We are a Model C fiscal sponsor. So actually the most common one probably out there that you may or may not have encountered is Model A, where here the funding source gives money to the sponsor, and the project is a part of the sponsor. So the project becomes a project of the fiscal sponsor. It's sometimes called comprehensive fiscal sponsorship. That, as I said, is not the type of fiscal sponsorship that PDF does. We do Model C, where the funding comes to our fiscal sponsor, us as the fiscal sponsor, and we provide a grant in the form of money to the project. The project has its own tax and legal identity. So they have their own bank account, they have their own EIN, which is the employee identification number administered by the IRS. And that grant conforms to a written agreement that is signed by both the project and our executive director. It starts with a grant request, so that's the application process that I'll talk about later, and then an annual report, and we'll talk about that in more detail as well. But it's more akin to a traditional grant application and grant report, etc., except that it's like ongoing and it's a closer relationship than most organizations have with one of their grant funders. So one question is, why be fiscally sponsored? Why not just start up your own 501c3 or not be fiscally sponsored in the first place, or what have you? Fiscal sponsorship is a good way to have space for incubation for new projects and ideas. The donors who donate to your organization can receive tax deductions for their donations. That is probably the most common reason why people enter into fiscal sponsorship relationships, so that they can have access to foundation grants, and so donors can have that tax deductible piece for their taxes. Economies of scale is important as well, and that's related to this access to infrastructure piece. So here at the Peace Development Fund, we have several staff members, here who are dedicated to the administration of the funds that come in, as well as the acknowledgement letters that go out, and kind of some of those backbone administrative pieces to support our fiscal sponsor organizations. And because it's centralized within our organization, we have those economies of scale. So an organization would have access to that infrastructure, as well as expertise from us in terms of being a nonprofit for a long time, having staff on here available for advice and guidance, as well as the capacity building work that I had mentioned. And we'll get into more details about what that is, but it involves a combination of training and consultation and other types of guidance. And then at base, it potentially, hopefully, can allow folks to focus on the program and fundraising work and kind of leave some of those administrative pieces to the fiscal sponsor. So now I'll kind of go do an overview of our particular program. Different programs are set up in different ways. So I don't know why the O is behind the quotation marks, but so this quote says, "Our work." This is a quote actually from one of our fiscally sponsored organizations. "Our work is not always understood or appreciated by funders, but because PDF gets us and supports us, other foundations are more willing to fund our work." So this organization that Stephanie Autumn is the director of is the American Indian Prison Project Working Group in Minnesota. And they've been fiscally sponsored by us for many years, definitely over 5, maybe as many as 10. Our fiscal sponsorship program has been around for about 12 years. And well, I'll get into some of the history of our program. So I mentioned that we are a Model C fiscal sponsor. So each of the organizations that we fiscally sponsor have their own legal and tax identity. So they are a separate organization from us. As I mentioned, 12 plus years experience as a fiscal sponsor. We fiscally sponsor over 40 organizations. I think right now we're at 44. Just got another application yesterday, so going to be processing that, and it might be 45 soon. We only fiscally sponsor US-based organizations. That being said, if you are looking to support work that's being done in another country, there are ways to do that. We have organizations who are supporting work happening in other countries and raise money here for that effort. So if that happens to be your situation, then let's have a conversation about it. Our fiscally sponsored organizations range in size from even just, this is a few $1,000s, even there are some organizations that raise a few $100s each year because that's all that their organization needs, to organizations who raise $500,000 or more, or we've actually had some organizations raise more than $1 million in a year. So a big range in terms of the size of organization. There's no minimum in terms of how much money you have to raise in a year. And that means also that if you raise $0 during the year, there's no penalty or anything like that. We do have a fiscal sponsorship fee of 7.5%. So that is taken out of each donation that comes in to PDF. We also have an annual maintenance fee of $105. That is separate from the 7.5. So I mentioned a bit about kind of what our program offered to participants. One offering is flexible donation processing. So we accept donations in many different forms. Paper checks, of course, but increasingly more and more donations are coming in via online credit card. And we set up an online payment portal for your donors to go on, and there's a donation form where they fill out their information, and that information goes into our database. And we provide that information back to you on a monthly basis. So the next thing here is transparent reporting. So I'll get to that in a second, but back to the flexible donation processing. We also accept stock donations. Many times, especially higher level donors have stock that they're holding that they would like to make as a donation. So we do accept stock donations. We accept donations from IRA disbursements that happen, that are required to happen after age 70 and a half. Now, according to, I think it was the newest tax law. And then we also accept donations via electronic funds transfer, either a wire or ACH. And increasingly, foundations are requesting to have donations be transferred that way. So lots of different options for how donations can come in. So now to the transparent reporting. So one struggle that I have heard, the most common struggle that I have heard from from organizations that have been fiscally sponsored elsewhere, is that their fiscal sponsor wasn't very good at letting them know what money had come in and how much money they had in the bank, as it were. So at the Peace Development Fund, the way that it works is each time a donation comes into the Peace Development Fund that is marked for one of our fiscally sponsored organizations, we enter that donation into our donor database and our accounting database. And at the end of the month, we reconcile those two databases with our bank statement to make sure everything is accurate and that we have accurate information to report to our fiscally sponsored organizations. And then we send a list to each of our fiscally sponsored organizations of all the donations that they received during the previous month, along with the names and any contact information we have for that donor. It also outlines how much the donation was, how much the, say, credit card fees were, how much PDF's fee was, the fiscal sponsorship fee, and then how much money went into be earmarked for that fiscally sponsored organization. And then once that reconciliation is done, we process grants on a monthly basis. So whatever the balance is for a given organization, that money will be dispersed the next month, as long as it's more than $500. If it's less than $500, we usually hang on to it until it grows up to $500. But most organizations, raise more than $500 in a month. It's not everyone, but as I said, organizations of all sizes. So that's with the transparent reporting of all donations. Then support with grant tracking and reporting is about if you receive grant funding from foundations. We have a grant reporting and tracking database that we use, and that database will help you as well to know when grant reports are coming due, different grants that you have responsibility for. Ultimately, actually, the Peace Development Fund is legally the grantee, but of course, as as your fiscal sponsor, that's the role that we would take on, but you would, of course, still be responsible for delivering the programs, etc. Another program offering is the capacity building piece that I had mentioned, and this can be tailored to your organization's needs. We have monthly, well, this is monthly webinars. At this point, they are monthly. Sometimes we skip a month, but quite a few during the year. And there are definitely more during the end of the year because people are very interested to have webinars on fundraising, especially. So topics like fundraising and nonprofit management. I've had topics from volunteer, how to run an effective volunteer-led organization, running online meetings, engaging in elections. We talk about fiscal planning, all different kinds of things, and tailored oftentimes to organizations kind of on the smaller and newer end of things. As well as access to one-on-one consultation. This says with PDF staff, but for the most part, that's with me. I am the manager, the director, as it were, of the fiscal sponsorship program, and offer that one-on-one consultation on an as-needed basis. Additionally, we have a community of other fiscally sponsored organizations that share your values. We have a wide range of organizations. You can go to our website and see all the different organizations who are fiscally sponsored by PDF, and they're not all in one type of organization. It really runs the gamut from an organization teaching older folks in Puerto Rico about making pottery as a way of healing from trauma, to the American Indian Prison Project Working Group that I was talking about in Minnesota. In California, we have quite a few organizations, actually. One in particular that I'm thinking of organizes Indigenous people around justice for Indigenous communities, as well as let's see, on the East Coast, then we have an organization who supports peace building work in Palestine. We have an organization here in Massachusetts who is working with asylum seekers to create a community of support and help people into their new lives. So it's everything from, direct service to political organizing, not partisan organizing, of course, but charitable, public education, strengthening democracy type work, and everything in between. So take a look at the various organizations. And the one thing all these organizations have in common is that they are looking to grow their organizations, and there's an emerging community of organizations looking to support each other through, as fellow fiscally sponsored organizations. Okay, so now, there it goes. This is just a recent staff photo that we took. That is my dog there, pictured, Aurora, the office mascot. This is the staff that is centered here in Amherst, Massachusetts. We also have an office in San Francisco, California. And so once I receive that picture, I'm going to add that one in here. But that's the team here in Amherst. Okay, so now talking a little bit more in details about the roles and responsibilities between Peace Development Fund and the organizations we fiscally sponsor. So fundraising, like how does the money come in? The Fiscal Sponsorship Project is responsible for the fundraising. PDF provides support both in terms of trainings and that sort of consultation work. I've helped organizations develop a fundraising plan, helped organizations develop a grant seeking plan, that sort of thing, as well as support in terms of how to actually get the list and format it, that sort of thing. We can pull donor lists from our database that are very useful for fundraising efforts. The second thing here is donor tracking and tax receipts. That is Peace Development Fund. So we track the donors, we send them their annual, their tax receipts after their donation comes in. We usually send the acknowledgement letters about weekly so that donors get a timely response to their donation. And, you know, as I said, we provide that monthly report of all of your donors with their contact information. So, so that you can send your own thank you communications if you would like as well. But the official tax deductible, you know, letter that comes from us. Tax reporting for the fiscally sponsored organization is the responsibility of the fiscally sponsored project. So PDF files PDF's taxes, and the fiscally sponsored organization files the fiscally sponsored organization's taxes. Of course, the information that we provide around donors and that sort of thing can be useful for your tax reporting, but we don't file your taxes for you, for instance. Grant contracts. So for those of you who are considering applying for grants, once you receive a grant, usually the funder will send a grant agreement to be signed. These grant agreements then are signed by our executive director, Paul Heibel, and we do a good job of turning those around in a timely manner and providing bank details to the funder, providing other information that the funder may need about us as the fiscal sponsor. And then we will also notify the fiscally sponsored project of upcoming report deadlines, as I mentioned before. And then there's, you know, compliance requirements and an annual report. Compliance is don't do anything illegal with the money that we give to you. Make sure that the money that we not give to you, that we grant to you, make sure that that money is used for charitable purposes that are in line with the mission that you put on your fiscal sponsorship application. That's all compliance issues. There's also, you know, a grant agreement, fiscal sponsorship grant agreement with PDF that has stipulations in it as well. And so the responsibility of the fiscally sponsored project is to know what those are and follow them. And then to provide the Peace Development Fund with an annual report. It's a relatively straightforward report. The narrative portion of it is what accomplishments did you have for the year? What kind of challenges did you have for the year? You know, what did you do essentially? And then feedback on the program, as well as the bulk of the kind of the heart of the report is the financial reporting, because you need to show how much money was brought in and how you spent the money that the Peace Development Fund granted to your organization. And one piece to note here for the grant contracts is that the Peace Development Fund does not accept government grants. So anything from the federal government to, a local government, that sort of thing. The reporting and auditing requirements that go along with taking government money is more than the Peace Development Fund is set up to do right now. So the application process. If after all this you think, yes, that's for me, then the first step would actually be to have a conversation with PDF staff. So that would be myself. We would discuss alignment of the mission and also alignment of the programmatic needs. What does your organization need in a fiscal sponsor? If you need a fiscal sponsor who is going to manage your payroll and hire your employees, then we are not the fiscal sponsor for you because we don't provide those services. But if you need a fiscal sponsor who is going to, provide that level of transparency and a fiscal sponsor where you need more flexibility, maybe we are the fiscal sponsor for you. So, just considering some of the needs that your organization has, and if Peace Development Fund is set up to meet those needs. Then there is an online application. The online application has no deadlines, and we accept applications on a rolling basis. There's a $250 application fee, but I only suggest that people pay that fee once they've had the conversation with me. And I've said, yeah, I think this is a good fit because I'm not just in the business of gathering application fees and then saying no. So that conversation is the most important piece really of this whole timeline, or a key piece of this whole timeline. There's a list of the documents and the questions that are on the application. There's a list of those things in our fiscal sponsorship handbook, which is on our website. And the online application link can also be found at our website. And that, as I said, there's no deadline, so you can submit that at any time, and then the board approval happens over email. So it's not like there's an upcoming meeting that you need to get it in by this date in order for it to be considered, etc. So board approval happens, as I said, via email, and I only send applications to our board of directors once I can say to them, I am recommending this for approval. So after I get an application, if I anticipate that there are going to be questions from our board of directors on a particular issue, or if something in the application isn't clear, then I will contact the organization and we will get that clarified before I send it to the board. After board approval happens, then we sign the fiscal sponsorship grant agreement. It's signed by both Peace Development Fund and the fiscally sponsored project. And typically, we're looking at about 3 to 5 weeks after receiving the application and the application fee. And then after we have that signed fiscal sponsorship grant agreement, then it's time to launch. I do an onboarding with any members of the fiscally sponsored project staff or volunteers that are interested in doing an onboarding with me. I go over the process of how things work. We talk about what the fundraising goals are for the organization and how the Peace Development Fund can support those, as well as any technical assistance needs that the organization has, or what their interest in capacity building is, etc. then they can start fundraising, either through checks or online donations, the stock gifts, grants, all of that. As soon as that fiscal sponsorship grant agreement is signed, then we're ready to go for the organization to start fundraising. Donations come to the Peace Development Fund. Checks should be made out to the Peace Development Fund, that sort of thing, with the fiscally sponsored organization's name in the memo line. And then this is something new that we're implementing. We have a seal that you can add to your website that says fiscally sponsored by the Peace Development Fund. So the fiscally sponsored organizations are picking out the logo this month. So this is just a little bit of more information. Our fiscal sponsorship program handbook. It's a wealth of resources. It's like 35 plus pages long. It answers pretty much any question you might have about, the logistics of the program. Not everybody learns best by reading a 35-page document. So that's why we're having this info session, as well as the conversation with myself as a staff member is really important. So you can check out more on our fiscal sponsorship page, but definitely before submitting an application, schedule a call with me, either by emailing me there at emily@peacefund.org. Or I have a Calendly link as well that is linked in this slide. And for those of you who registered for this webinar, you will receive the slide deck after in an email afterwards. So this slide will have those live links on it. And then after that initial conversation, you can start your online application. So just in summary, PDF provides fiscal sponsorship to a diverse range of projects and groups, as I talked about. And this is a part of our mission to build the capacity of community-based organizations, really wanting to foster a more peaceful, just, and equitable world. We really regard our 45, it's about 45 fiscally sponsored projects as partners in human rights and social justice movements. And we regard our decades of experience in social justice philanthropy as making us an optimal home to support these budding projects. So I hope that, that today's information has been useful. Again, my name is Emily. Here's just a little bit about me. And thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to stop the recording and ask if there's any questions that folks have. Yes, stop.